It's 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started with the Wednesday Wind Down webinar and YouTube show. I'm Dan Conger. I'm the host of this webinar, and this is the webinar and YouTube show for outdoor enthusiasts that maybe aren't getting out as outdoors as they want to due to COVID-19. I like to get outdoors and go hiking with my friends, and I also like to go drink beer with my friends. So I'm doing it remotely right now. So tonight, here's my plug. I'm drinking Belching Beaver's Mexican chocolate peanut butter stout. Very filling, very good. So I'm Dan Conger. I'm going to be hosting, and tonight we've got Saul with us. And Saul, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit, just briefly, about your background?
I'm Saul Morphine. I'm a small animal veterinarian. I work in Marietta, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've been hiking for more than 20 years.
Awesome.
Once I got out of school.
Right. So tonight we're going to talk about pets and specifically dogs on the trail and when you're outdoors. And the idea on this, well, I don't know about a lot of, there's been more than once I've been out in the trail and I've seen someone with an animal that is suffering, that is not doing well. Generally here in California, it's a lot of animals that are overheated, that they didn't have enough water, or the animal is just in distress for whatever reason it is. And people like to take their animals with them, and I understand that. But we kind of really wanted to bring an expert and be able to talk about some of the things to consider before you bring your animal out on the trail. So with that, let's kind of start off. You had kind of had one of the things you were talking about was really the preparation before you go out, right?
Well, as with any trip, the best trips are the ones you prepare the most for.
Mm-hmm.
With yourself, it's a certain amount of prep that you have to do, but when you add in a dog, you have to do an especially longer prep time. There's certain things that you certainly want to be aware of before you even get out there. The first thing is you really have to know the location you're going, and ultimately know if dogs are allowed to begin with. There's plenty of rules that are in every place that is going to limit what you do with your dog. Most places, whether it's the national forest or the state park or even the local parks, will have some rules that you have to abide by. And so you have to be prepared for that.
Now, generally, is national forest more open to dogs and state parks less so?
Yeah, national forests allow you a lot more flexibility on where you can take your dog, whether it's dispersed camping. But state parks tend to be pretty stringent about things. They tend to want you to keep them on campgrounds or fire roads or actual paved roads are the only places you can take them. Okay. But a lot of them do have very similar rules in that they want you certainly to have constant control of your dog, whether it's by leash. Some of them allow voice commands, but most of them are leash.
And I don't own dogs anymore. It's been a while, but I'd say as a non-dog owner, that being in control of your animal is really critical for anybody else that's maybe not a dog person, right? Because I would say it's amazing how many people think that it's like, well, I love my dog, so everybody loves my dog. And
I've been through situations where I've got control of my dog, but people will come up and their dogs are off leash, and they run on my dogs, and so you have to be considerate of other people, their space. But remember, your dog is an extension of you.
That's a good point.
You really have to have a good bond with your dog, and you also have to make sure that he's socialized to be out there.
Okay.
Other things that, obviously are critical is being a person that's conscientious. You have to clean up after your pet. And that's a major problem everywhere you go, whether it's little parks all the way up to the national forest. You're always got risk of stepping on some scat, but dog scat's not something you want to step on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, so the other one that I think that I don't know if it's a little, it's probably more than a complaint, but it's not uncommon to see the green bag tied up in a knot and left. Yeah, I'll get it. Maybe the intent, I don't know. Maybe the intent is I'll get it later.
I'll get it on the way out is usually what,
Yeah.
we've all done it, I'm sure. But I always get it. That's the whole thing. You have to get it. I try to hide it a little bit too, so that I know. But that's a human thing. Is
Right.
the ones that don't want to necessarily deal with the stinky stuff when it's there. It'll ruin the fun a little bit.
We'll just wait till they need a wag bag when they go into the Whitney zone or
Yeah.
someplace else, right? Then that's a whole nother ball game.
That's definitely something that if you're backpacking with your dog, you definitely have to keep that in mind too.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's plenty of rules that you need to be aware of, and really that comes way before you even go out there on that trail.
Right.
And just like scouting it out on your own is good, but having your dog obviously adds on an extra layer of responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's these rules, lots of different rules to consider, and kind of where you're going to go. That's going to those rules are going to vary where you're going. There's got to be some risks associated with bringing your animal out, right? So,
Well,
there's risks when I go out, so there's got to be a different set of risks with your animal.
Well, you're aware of your risks, and obviously you can control a lot of the problems you get into. But when you have another little being following you or running ahead of you, those risks are front and center. I think one of the most important thing to consider is the terrain that you're going to be in. Obviously, having dogs running through rocky areas means that they're likely to get their feet hurt. Having them go through any kind of wet areas means that they can actually develop little infections in between toes, just like people. They can get blisters too. So all those things, narrow trails, obviously you run the risk of falling, and dogs do too. So the terrain has to be an important thing to consider when you're thinking about taking your dog out there.
So is that dogs in general, or do you think that's unique to each individual dog? For example, how technical of a terrain is that? Are there certain breeds that might fit better, or is it just like, don't ever, if it's this kind of terrain, you don't ever want to take a dog there?
There's definitely some individuals that are more fit than others to be out there, just like in people. Dogs are kind of similar. There are certain breeds that you don't even want to even consider taking out of the house at certain temperatures.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think the main thing is you have to know your dog too. Okay. And that really is something I'll get to in a second. But as far as risks go, the other things that you have to consider besides the terrain is the weather. The weather is really a horrible thing. It could be a great thing if you enjoy it, but for your dog, who generally tends not to perspire very well, being out in hot weather, it can be a life-threatening thing. I've had situations myself where I've thought, I'm going to take my dog out and on this hike, and it is an uphill hike, and I know that the weather is going to be a certain temperature, but it turns out that 75 degrees going uphill all of a sudden turned into a dog that was 80, 85 degrees for them, and they were looking for shade. And then they started panting heavily, and I had to carry him all the way back down. So I mean, the key is, I like to think of it this way: keep them safe, and if you can't get them to the point where they're at a good, comfortable temperature, keep them at home. That's going to be the best thing. I recommend keeping dogs between the temperatures of about 45 degrees to 75 degrees. If it gets much over 75, they're going to have a hard time cooling down.
So in Southern California, that would definitely be probably not peak summer. It would be shoulder seasons, right? It would be spring and fall would be way better.
Yeah. Really, you have to, in Southern California here, there's certain times you just can't take your dog out past a certain time of day. Yeah. I think you got to do things really early or late in the afternoon, evening.
Okay.
Yeah. But when you're hiking, you don't have very many options, and you got to figure out a way of keeping your dog safe, and making sure that they stay cool is going to be one of your priorities. That means you're going to need to make sure you have plenty of water, make sure you have even some shade for them, and if it comes down to it, you got to be ready to go home too.
Good point. Good. I actually, I probably like that one the most. And I think that's where, even in my group, when we go out, if one person is suffering, it's like, it's time to turn the bus around and head back. And if there are people that don't do that way, don't do that. And if they don't do that with their pet, it could be fatal.
Yeah. I think that the way I look at it is if he's going to be uncomfortable, that means my trip's going to end quick.
Yeah.
So I'd rather just keep them at home if that's going to be the situation.
So someday it's going to rain again in Southern California. So
soon, I hope.
Yeah, we'll take it. What are there any considerations when it's raining or drizzly?
Well, obviously the rain is something that can make the ground a bit slippery for you, but for your dog, it just generally tends to make it so that they can get things like wet paws and wet feet, and that wetness softens their feet. So any rocks or anything else is going to potentially hurt them as well. Just like when you walk barefoot, which hopefully you don't out there, it's going to hurt sometimes. And then you got also the fact that if you happen to be in snow, obviously the situation's bad. It goes to even worse. Lightning, that's like the worst case for a dog. You know, the dogs that are indoors already get so stressed with light.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
It's funny when you had that point on our outline, I thought, well, yeah, I don't want to be in lightning, but there's the thunder, the loud noise. Ooh, yeah, okay.
Those dogs, you get to the point where they start hearing that rumble, and they're running for their lives, and you're going to lose your dog if you're in a situation like that.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else in the weather category?
I think that you have to certainly think about certain tools to take with you if you are going to be in weather. One thing is rain. Obviously, raincoats. They make raincoats for dogs. They also make the little pet booties that you can carry with you, and that should protect them. But you have to get them used to it. Dogs don't take to those very easily. I've tried many times, believe me.
It was rather amusing when Sandra got dog booties for her Dixie, and pick it up and shake it, and pick the next one up and shake it, and it's like, yeah, it takes a long time for him to get used to it, for sure.
Yeah. Well, then the other risks that we got to consider, besides the weather, is the plant and animal risks that are there.
Okay.
There's certainly plenty of things out there that are not going to be very friendly to your dog. If you go out into the desert, for instance, things like cactus, the sharp points, dogs, they don't see that as a risk, that they walk in it, and all of a sudden they start limping, and your trip is going to end real quick. Cholla, then you have the sharp points of yucca. In the hills, the mountains, poison oak tends to be an issue.
So question on poison oak then is they've got a fur coat. Do they still have a potential for getting a poison oak rash?
Some dogs are sensitive to that, and they can have an allergy just like we can. Most dogs don't, but the problem is that you have a sensitivity yourself as a human.
Yeah, you pet your animal, and now they've transferred it to you.
Exactly. And that's happened many times to me, and I didn't even know my dog walked near poison oak, but I remember it.
Okay.
Yeah, but one big thing that you also have to consider here in California is foxtails. You guys familiar with foxtails, Dan?
Yeah, yeah. It's I forget what it's a grassy weed that has a seed head that has it would often travel one way.
The little arrowhead looking thing that
Yeah,
sticks in your socks when you go walking
yeah.
through that tall, dry grass. Well, foxtails are kind of the vet's best friend and the vet's best enemy or worst enemy. We see plenty of those every year when the season dries up there. And foxtails definitely will stick in between toes. They'll go up as dogs sniff the ground. They'll go up noses. They'll get in underneath eyelids, in ears. So I mean, this is something you have to certainly know, that if your dog is off leash running around in that tall dry grass, you're going to have to go hunting for foxtails afterwards. Whether it's a long-haired dog, especially, but even short-haired dogs will get them in between.
Right.
Oh, you should see the nightmares I see at work with foxtails.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Yeah. Hey, I'm gonna interject right now. We are about the halfway point through. So if you've got questions that you want to ask Saul, we'll answer them at the end. Put them in either in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll catch them at the end. So, okay. So animals. What kind of animal? You mentioned that animal risks. So I can think of one that's, and I'm thinking rattlesnakes.
Yeah, rattlesnakes are obviously a major problem here. In fact, a couple of days ago, I almost stepped on one. Thankfully, I didn't have my dog with me, but I almost stepped on one. But the key is, it's going to be very important that you prepare for some emergency. Okay, part of that prep is to know where the emergency hospitals are, where the nearest vet clinic is, because something like a rattlesnake bite, although it may seem like a small puncture, the injection of the toxin in there damages tissue locally and also goes systemically and can do some pretty severe damage, if not death. So obviously, keys is to keep them on leash and to be aware of your surroundings. And if they're on trails, it's going to be a lot safer than if they go bounding around bushwhacking themselves. Okay.
So I could see being on leash, having more control over, and not being on leash. You're just kind of at the mercy of whatever the hell the dog wants to do.
Yeah. Pretty much, you're going to end your trip quick if he's just running around.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Right.
I will say that, there's other diseases that your dog's going to be susceptible to if you're not cautious and keeping them safe there. I mean, everything from viral diseases, if they're not vaccinated, things like parvo, or if he goes around wild animals, certainly rabies would be a major thing. So you got to make sure that they're vaccinated against those things. Things like fleas and all that, they certainly can pick up also from other animals out there, or just being in areas where other animals have been. There's even a more serious disease getting attention right now, is a bacterial disease that causes blue-green algae. You know that in those ponds that you guys like, you'll get the temperature that goes up above 75 degrees in the water that's got nitrification in there, and all of a sudden you've got a nice little environment for cyanobacteria to grow. This forms that blue-green algae, and certain dogs love to go swimming, and so they'll jump into that pond, they'll drink that water, and within 30 minutes they could certainly get super sick and die.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, this is, again, a rule is try to keep them on leash and under control at all times. If you can do that, you're going to have a good trip. If you don't, you're at the mercy of nature. And as you know, nature can be one harsh thing.
Although another way to put it is, nature don't give a shit. So it's you're just a speck there that, like, it's just going to do what it's going to do, and you may be in the way, and your pet may be in the way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could go over a long list of diseases they would pick up, from bacterial, drinking water, leptospirosis, which is a human disease that also can be transmitted from your pet to you. So you have to take care of them. Giardia,
So it would seem that some of this could be you could be aware of this, or with regular exams and regular.
There's
If we're gonna we want to keep Saul in business, so make a regular visit to your vet.
Yeah, and I think it's critical that if you're going to have them out there, protect them as much as possible. And part of that is making sure that they get regular exams, but also that they're vaccinated for things like parvo, rabies, leptospirosis, Lyme disease. These are all vaccines that can protect them against some of these diseases that are out there. One disease that they could get, certainly if you go up into areas where there's mosquitoes, heartworm disease.
That comes from mosquitoes.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay. And is heartworm actually a worm, and does it impact the heart, or is it something?
It is a worm.
Okay.
Mosquito transmits a larval stage. It's actually very microscopic at that stage.
Okay.
And through the injection of its saliva will transmit that, and it will migrate into the blood system and eventually after a few months, form into an adult worm that's actually spaghetti looking in the heart.
So that's amazing. That a lot of us are aware that a mosquito, a pest in itself, can be a vector. There's a mosquito flying around my face, a vector for other diseases. For example, West Nile is or malaria. It doesn't, those diseases don't bother the mosquito. I had no idea, although it makes sense that it not only just carries not a virus, but a parasite. That's pretty fascinating. A parasite on a parasite.
Nature is pretty incredible that way. Mosquitoes are the bane of human existence, but also animals, a different existence. This is something where, the best thing is for you to make sure that they're as prepared as possible to be out in that environment. And yes, there are certain preventatives that you can consider. For things like heartworm, there's a pill that you can give them, or even an injection you can give them that prevents that disease. Your vet, I'm sure, will be able to give you more information on that. But then there's even flea and tick preventative. Obviously, ticks carry plenty of disease as well for dogs and humans. And so flea and tick preventative, making sure they're protected against that is a very important thing before you get out there. Try to avoid permethrins in cats. Permethrins is one of the tick preventatives that people use. Some of the more generic ones have high permethrins, and in cats that actually can be very toxic and cause pretty severe disease.
Not as many trail cats as there are trail dogs, but they do exist.
It's beautiful to see when they're out there, especially with the bobcats.
Oh, wow. I think that was when I posted the announcement for this webinar on Facebook, and someone put a picture of running into a trail cat. I'm like, I've never seen that. I've seen a city cat in a backpack, but I have not seen them on the trail. So
yeah. Well, one other thing, I know that earlier you mentioned breeds. I'll just comment that your vet will certainly be able to give you information as to whether your breed of dog should be out there. There are certain dogs, particularly the ones that are very flat-faced breeds, they really should not be out in any kind of heat because they just can't breathe well to begin with, and it's life-threatening if they do get out in temperatures that are going to make them have to pant excessively.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the equipment that we might want to bring, that somebody might want to bring along.
Okay. Well, as with any trip, the key is kind of knowing how long you're going to be out there and what your necessities are going to be. For things like day hikes, for instance, and you don't have to carry a huge backpack for your dog, but it's good to have certain things like, for instance, the Twist-A-Tick, which is a little tick removal device, and certainly poop bags, water bowl, plenty of water, treats for them. All those things are going to be important in order to at least have a good outing when you're going on day hikes. Things like the 10 essentials for people,
Yeah.
You certainly want to add in certain things for your dog. For instance, you may want to add some pain medicine. Your vet can always help you with that. Even antibiotic, anti-inflammatory cream, that kind of stuff tends to be something that can help them. A little first aid for your dog is always a few additions that you might want to add in as well.
Okay. Good. Good.
And one last thing, though, if you're backpacking, I mean, obviously that adds an extra level of amount of equipment that you have to have. Not only do you have to have that, but you should consider a little dog backpack, because they should probably bear some of the load. Also, raincoat, weather, even if it gets too cold, you might need a jacket for them. Things like an extra little sleeping pad for them, and even a little bag for them, smaller bag, but something that they can sleep in. And of course, a water filter for you. Feed them, give them some water that's filtered as well.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely, if you day hike is one thing. Well, there's walk in the park. That's one day hike. And then overnight or multiple nights. Yeah. Completely different sets of gear. Yeah. So we're going to take a look at the questions. So if anybody else has any more questions, go ahead and dump them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll catch them. So one that Sandra popped up, and it was actually on my list too, was how do you feel about rattlesnake avoidance training? So we talked briefly about snakes, but we didn't talk about, are those valid? Do those work?
Yes, they do. There is a rattlesnake vaccine, which obviously is
as a preemptive.
There's actually a vaccine that helps decrease the severity of the disease if they get bitten by a rattlesnake. It does not completely make them immune to it, though. Okay, so what would be the best would be to have a combination of the vaccine with also the avoidance, and the avoidance is certainly something that can help them stay away from rattlesnakes. Dogs very curious; they're constantly sticking their nose where it shouldn't be. And in fact, that's where they get bitten. In the face. Yeah. And so that's something that if you can avoid, that would be the best thing. But yes, definitely recommend it.
So it's essentially a behavior training. Is that accurate?
It is. Yeah. It's basically scaring them when they see rattlesnakes, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Just through obstacle courses where rattlesnakes are, and they get treats when they avoid the rattlesnake, basically.
Okay. Awesome. That's great. Let's see. We already talked about booties. How would you do a layering system for a dog? How would you put in layers of clothing?
Well, the main thing is just like you do yourself. You obviously want to protect certain dogs from the sun. And so my white dog that has very little fur is one dog that I like to protect from the sun. So that actually is a dog sunblock. You can put it into. But then there's things like T-shirts. You can put dog T-shirts, the lighter ones, and then you can layer up to using fleece as well, and even the actual outer shells that are fleece lined. Those are ways of layering things for dogs.
I saw a picture somewhere on one of the Facebook groups of somebody I think it was the Eastern Sierra backpacking group, and someone had brought along 3 dogs, and I think they were almost like a therapy or a companion dog. They were significant to the individual, and all 3 dogs had wraparound goggles, and I think, which was awesome, but I was so disappointed they did not call them doggles.
They actually do have doggles.
They call, okay, good. I'm glad they call them, because they should be called doggles.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, one last question. Should a tick be removed if they're already on there? Should the tick be removed if the dog is already on an anti-tick medication?
Yes, just because they're on an anti-tick medication doesn't mean a tick won't bite them and still cause a reaction locally. Okay. They may die soon thereafter, but they will cause a little local reaction.
Okay, beautiful.
care when you do remove a tick, though.
Sure.
What you don't want to do is separate the head from the body. Okay, the best thing is to use that twisted tick where it's like a little spade that gets underneath and toward the proboscis, the mouth part, and then as you twist, it kind of twists it out, and so it doesn't actually pull on the body to remove the head.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we just hit our mark perfectly on time, so that worked out great. Saul, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you sharing what you know, and I'm always glad to have new people on the show. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Dan, and I appreciate it. And hopefully everybody has a safe time with their pets.
Absolutely. Right. So we'll be back next week, 7 o'clock Pacific tomorrow, next week on Wednesday. And next week, I'm going to be talking about people layering systems, but for warm climates. So it's still hard to imagine that you're going to wear anything more than a t-shirt for the rest of your life. But at some point it will cool off and we'll need to be thinking about layers again. This is not Midwest or Eastern layering systems. This is going to be layering systems that apply to the West and to the warmer climate. So that's what we'll be talking about next week. Thanks again, Saul. Appreciate you. Good seeing everybody. Have a great week, everybody. Take care.